Ghost Modern, Chapter 6. Sarah watched as the few men in the tiny village gathered together on the edge of the huts, across the track. Sarah gulped. The inevitable outcome was too much to bear. "Why don't they run?" she whispered. The old woman didn't answer, just looked down at the unfolding tragedy. The centurion stomped up to within about 100 feet of the native men. A man at the front of the legion read something from a scroll he held out in front of him. Sarah couldn't understand the words. Distant anyway, but presumably in Latin. The native men obviously couldn't understand the words either, but they knew the meaning. One shouted back in another language, also unintelligible to Sarah. She thought about how the language of the place she had now lived had transformed over years, decades, centuries. Layers of words mixed in with the skin, blood and bone. The native men gesticulated with their spears. The centurions wasted no time. This was just a minor bump on the road for them. Sarah had to look away as just the front row of the legion's formation broke away and drew their swords. Shouts in anger, metal clashes briefly, then screams. Some women run out of the huts as Sarah feels she has to look back, go to their dead men on the floor. Then they throw themselves in fury at the Romans. Sarah looks away again as the soldiers quickly send them to join their husbands. The old woman grabs Sarah's arm. She turns and follows where the old woman is pointing. She sees another woman running from the back of the hut, away from the soldiers at the other end of the settlement. With her were several children, and also an older man and woman. They ran to the forest, the far tip, at the base of the hill, some distance from Sarah and her old companion. The fight doesn't end, it has to be creative, using the knowledge of the land, the knowledge the invaders always want but cannot master. They can destroy till everything seems to have reached oblivion, but at that point there will always be something new created from the energy in the earth. We can transform. The old woman looked with emotion at the tears on Sarah's cheeks. "Let me show you something, Sarah." They went back into the forest and walked for what seemed like hours. The close-knit trees with thick roots sticking up from the ground. A few fallen tree trunks and boulders. All made every footstep difficult. Even so, Sarah felt an amazing energy from the ancient forest as her fingers touched the rough bark of many trunks. She felt the ages of time they had lived through. Like her, but ages had collapsed into minutes. She marvelled at the old woman. She kept moving at a steady pace, not seeming to tire. Above her head were always birds, chirping and singing, but Sarah's admiration for her was tempered by the thought that all the horrors and insanity of the last days and weeks had happened at the time as the old woman had appeared. Suddenly, the tree line ended and they were at the base of a further hill. There was a trail of small rocks that led up to the top of the hill. The old woman breathed in the air with deep breath and started following the stone trail. It was a fresh day, sunny but cool, with the fluffy natural clouds Sarah remembered from her childhood. As he got closer to the top, Sarah saw a giant grey cloud sitting above them, like it was an extension of the hill. They reached the top. On the peak is another, smaller mound, ringed with a stone wall. As they went closer, Sarah saw the stones were constructed in a dry wall style, white stones. "It's a long barrow, Sarah." Sarah had heard the words without knowing what it was, seen signs. It was quiet up here, no trace of sounds of soldiers or screams. Then there were some squawks from behind her. She was startled, but turned to see several pheasants further down the hill. Then she looks up and sees a falcon, or maybe a hawk, floating high, looking for prey to swoop down on. The long barrows were made thousands of years ago, Sarah, even thousands before the time we're standing now, when the Romans invaded England. They are burial chambers, I think I read. Yes, there are many generations of bones under the earth here, but there is a lot more to these long barrows than just a tomb. Not for nothing have these people in your time and the centuries before built into the land. They know the energy that can be tapped. The old woman stepped forward and beckoned Sarah to follow. Step inside. For the second time in minutes and eons, she accepted an invitation to go into a hole in the ground. Although dark, the stone entrance was facing the sun, and enough light came in to show the series of chambers coming off of the narrow corridor. She felt a silent energy cocooning her, not a fearful void, but a womb-like space. The bones she glimpsed in the chambers were the other end of life, but she felt like she was returning to a beginning. The stillness within the barrow transfixed Sarah. She could hear the rhythm of the blood in her ears. She was out of space and time, womb death. Then a quiet whispering, just in her head. The beneath sounds that you only hear when there is no external sound. But now louder from outside of her. The wind maybe, hopefully. Louder, a buzzing of whispers, flowing and eddying around her. Whispers, ghosts of voices. She remembered her dream of the other night when she had been enveloped by a dark, toxic cloud, like an immersion in angry bees. This was similar, but the sound had a light shining through it, and the voices were both within her at the opposite end of the universe, now and 1,000,000 years ago. She felt the presence of many people who had been entombed here. She felt a passing imprint of every life pressing into her, taking her breath, crushing every part of her, desperate for a human body to give them life again. These were the echoes of the bones, the matter, clawing like carrion birds with talons. Sarah feels them knifing through her fibre. She is ceasing to exist. But behind the desperate reverence of matter, there is infinite space. A whispering that went through the void within the atoms of the long barrow, the stones, the soil, the planet, and beyond. Beyond the aggressive fear and striving to exist in this reality, to become light. Sarah felt herself yearning for the space beyond, the loss of herself. But there were memories of John. What was happening to him? Where was he now? And other voices within the whispering. Voices she recognised, of family she knew, but others she had only heard about, and a wider ancestry, the people and peoples who came before. The people in the tribes and villages like she had just seen, and before them, and the people who had come after, and the people who had marched across lands to yield swords to bring another's world which was to be obeyed. And she knew the voices were telling her to go back, to stay in matter, because she has something important still to do here. And she focused on the soil and mud that she had sat on within the barrow's chambers, the earthiness between her fingers, and she writhes on the floor. She must get back. She has to get back. She digs her fingers into the ground that her absorbed the generations, the layers of matter, dead and decayed, and pulled herself, digging in with her feet and pushing back out of the narrow entrance to the mound, out of the dark space. Tears came from her eyes as they were hit by the sun. Through the salty water she sees on the hills of the horizon the colours of a rainbow, bending the light and water, joining sky to land. Sarah stands up and looks down from the top of the hill, the way they'd walked up. The old woman had disappeared. Again. Sarah starts to stumble back down the hill. She has to find the old woman, or she'll be forever marooned in this time. The old woman has ripped her life apart. She is just a husk, doesn't know who or what she is, when or where. The old woman has done this to her, and she starts to realise, to John. What had been happening to him began when he was attacked by birds. And birds were always around the old woman. She controlled them. She was responsible. Sarah's fury grew as she fought her way through the forest, pushing against branches that scratched her and tried to hold her. There were no birds in the branches this time. She finally came out onto the open field, looking down on the village. She cried again with relief as she looked down on brick houses, the old church, and even her own house, in the place where it had been before. She ran towards the village, her house. Perhaps everything would be the same as it was a few weeks ago. She could live again. Perhaps she'd been dreaming or hallucinating. She runs breathless to the house. The front door is unlocked. She rushes up the stairs, glancing at the wallpaper. It's the new modern pattern she and John had put up. It's going to be the same as it used to be, just her and John with the everyday worries of work and earning enough to pay bills and eat, and... She bursts into the bedroom and screams in despair. The creature she sees curled up on the bed is a hunched gargoyle. Dark skin with tufts of hair or something all over. A sharp, pointed head holding eyes piercing her with terror. She sinks into the corner by the door. She thinks the creature will swoop from the bed and attack her, but then she sees behind the eyes. The terror is within. John! My God! What's happened to you? My husband! She runs out of the room, down the stairs, out of the door. She must find the old woman. She has done this. She needs to restore John to the man he used to be. She runs towards the gate. Something is held at her head. She stumbles and falls. Again she is hit. A screech, a bird, then another, a flurry of feathers, claws, wings, beating in her ears. Beaks peck at her head and her body. She forces herself up and tries again to get to the gate. A wall of birds flew against her, pushing her back, a torrent of feathers, wings, beaks, claws. She can't go forward, so she has to go back. She runs back into the house, tries to slam the door, but the birds fly through, a great force, knocking her back. She cowers at the foot of the stairs, thinking this is the end. But the birds fly past and up the stairs. It seems like hundreds pass her. They seem to fill the house. Then suddenly they're gone. Sarah lowers her arms from her face. No sound. Still. Quiet. She gets up and walks slowly up the stairs, which were just a moment ago obliterated with a train of birds. At the top, she sees the door of their room is open. There is still silence. Where did they go? She goes to the door. The room is empty. No birds. No John. No gargoyle in flesh. She feels a breeze on her face and looks to the window. It's wide open.